Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming, and thanks to everyone watching online for our live stream. In order to support the ever-expanding solo literature of the trombone, it is important to champion new works for this instrument. The purpose of this lecture is to encourage the study and performance of two 21st century works written by American trombonist-composers Frank Gulino and Joseph Buono through an examination and performance of two solo compositions recently written by each composer. The harmonic and rhythmic simplicity of Gulino's Sonata Number One, The Journey, provides the performer with a piece that is substantial yet accessible, while Buono's Elegy for trombone and piano allows for deep emotional connection and expression based on the composer's programmatic intent, an area not commonly represented in solo trombone literature. I will present and discuss each composer's relevant biographical background, compositional inspirations and processes, and commission information where applicable. I will then explore both composition from the performer's perspective, providing organizational insight into the preparation of each piece, including form, harmony, and thematic development. Frank Gulino is a composer, bass trombonist, and entertainment attorney based in Washington, D.C. Originally from New York, he holds a Bachelor of Music degree in bass trombone performance from the Peabody Conservatory of Johns Hopkins University. He has written and published over 50 pieces for different ensembles, and his works have been commercially recorded on albums by Jerry Pagano, Stephen Mead, and Eastern Standard. Gulino's compositions have been performed at major festivals both domestically and internationally, and have also served as the required repertoire for a number of major international brass competitions. According to Gulino, his biggest compositional influences are band and film music, and his thoughts on texture and accessibility have been strongly influenced by Eric Ewazen. The second trombonist composer presented tonight is Joseph Buono. He's a bass trombonist and entrepreneur based in Boston, Massachusetts. He attended the Peabody Conservatory, earning both bachelor's and master's degrees in bass trombone performance and music education. He has written 5 compositions to date, and his first 2 pieces won several accolades, ultimately leading to the commission of the piece I will talk about tonight, Elegy for trombone and piano. It's worth noting that both Gulino and Buono possess a skill that many other composers of this medium do not. They are able to utilize the trombone substantially in their compositional processes. As you will see, Gulino incorporated parts of his personal warm-up into his sonata, and Buono improvised on trombone to develop his ideas for Elegy. Additionally, both composers are of Italian-American descent, are bass trombonists by trade, attended the Peabody Conservatory, spending a great deal of time together in the 1 year that they overlapped, studied with Baltimore Symphony bass trombonist Randy Campora, and neither of them ever took a composition lesson. Frank Gulino finished composing Sonata Number One, The Journey, in early 2019, though a full-length sonata was not his original objective. Initially, Gulino intended to write a slow, melodic, standalone recital piece. While nearing the completion of that work, he was inspired to segue into a more substantial multi-movement piece. Specifically, Gulino decided that his initial musical draft comprised the second and third movements to a first movement that he had not yet written. He felt that these 2 movements were some of his best writing to date and pushed himself to write a first movement that satisfactorily completed the piece. The 3-movement Sonata Number One, The Journey, was the result. The Journey was premiered at the 2019 Towson University Eastern Trombone Workshop. Dr. David Perkel, professor of trombone and euphonium at Towson, invited Matt Vaughn, co-principal trombonist of the Philadelphia Orchestra and Perkel's former U.S. Air Force band colleague, to perform at the workshop. Vaughn agreed and premiered Sonata Number One, The Journey, in September of 2019. Gulino's Sonata Number One is comprised of 3 6-minute movements. The piano part represents a consistent anchor for the trombonist, both harmonically and rhythmically. The majority of the piece lies in the trombone's middle register, although the trombonist should be prepared to extend to a B-flat 1 in the first movement and a D-flat 5 in the second. The first 2 movements contained extended cadenzas, both accompanied and unaccompanied, allowing the player more freedom of expression. From an analytical perspective, the knowledge that Gulino wrote the second and third movements before he wrote the first will inform my examination of this work. To assist in the discussion of thematic materials, I will present the movements in the order in which they were originally written, second, third, then first. This will provide a more logical examination of the thematic development and highlight Gulino's intent during his compositional process. The overall melodic content of the second movement can be broken down into 3 sections: quasi-cadenza, theme A, and theme B. The movement can be mapped as follows: quasi-cadenza in C, theme A happens in F and then in A flat, theme B happens in A flat twice, and then the quasi-cadenza comes back in A flat. The quasi-cadenza, theme A, and theme B are all based on the same 1-7-1-5 motive. Gulino uses this descending half-step, ascending perfect fifth motive 23 separate times throughout the piece, 14 in the second movement and 9 in the first, in different keys, rhythmic iterations, and sequences. 4 of those times, the ascending fifth is interrupted by a third, highlighted in red. Each of those interrupted occurrences includes a raised fourth, giving it a brief Lydian modality. This is the opening of the first movement. It is important for the player to recognize this 1-7-1-5 motivic repetition, as each occurrence allows for individualized expressive variation, yet should be approached with some consistency so as to allow the listener to notice these repetitions. Gulino's original intent was for this movement to be a single movement work for solo trombone. While nearing the completion, he was inspired to write a follow-up movement, forming what would become movements 2 and 3 of the sonata. The third movement can be divided into 4 sections: the introduction, first theme, interlude, and second theme. The intro and first theme appear at both the beginning and the end of the movement. The middle of the movement is comprised of the slower second theme and interlude, and the first theme section modulates down a minor third in the opening, but stays in the home key at the end of the piece. This movement presents the most technically challenging material of the piece. Quick and accurate slide motion and a strong double tongue are necessary to execute this movement successfully. The trombonist begins by playing ascending ninths from F2 to G3 with alternating accents, a pattern that originated in Gulino's personal warm-up. The first theme occurs in B flat at measure 13, then repeats and elaborates at measure 21 down a minor third in G. The quick tempo and micro adjustments needed between slide positions in the upper register make this section particularly troublesome with regards to intonation. The B section begins with the interlude, marked moderato at 43, exhibiting a drastic change in character and presenting material that Gulino will use again in the first movement, highlighted in red. The melodies here move largely by step, contrasting the leaps of fourths and fifths in the preceding sections. The sparse accompaniment allows for more rubato, and the interlude ends on a quasi-cadenza based on the melodic material from the beginning of the section. The second theme enters, marked expressively, introducing more new material that we'll see again verbatim in the first movement. The pianist then transitions into the return of the A section. The opening material returns, remaining in B flat through the end of the piece. This is the only overt similarity to sonata form in this sonata. A coda closes out the movement, ending triumphantly on a fortissimo B flat 4. In the context of the performance, the player should approach the slow middle section, theme 2 and interlude, in a way that enables the audience to recall the various melodic ideas from the first movement. As you will hear, the audience will have already heard a declamatory transformation of parts of theme 2 as the opening of movement 1, and the interlude here is identical in its occurrence to movement 1, excepting its key. As with the second and third movements, the first movement can be divided into 4 sections: the introduction or exposition, the primary theme, cadenza, and the second theme from the third movement. The form follows that order with a coda at the end. The movement begins with thematic material first presented in the second theme of the third movement. The graphic at the top is from movement 1. The graphic at the bottom is from movement 3. This is the second phrase of the third movement, highlighted in blue. And this is the opening of the first movement, illustrating Gulino's use of thematic transformation. The piece settles into D minor in measure 29, and the theme appears at measure 33, providing the first considerable range extension of the piece up to a C5. The movement modulates up a half step to E flat minor at 41, and then E flat major at 45, with a raised fourth, implying a Lydian modality similar to the second movement. In the opening of the piece, it's important for the performer to have developed their ability to vary their emotional character, as the first page encompasses both a heroic declamatory opening and a smoother, more melodic second section. The short piano interlude that follows references the opening thematic material. The trombonist then plays an extended, unaccompanied cadenza. The key signature matches that of the beginning, but the melody is lowered by a whole step. The first phrase is largely pentatonic, further obscuring the key. The second and third phrases imply D minor before disguising the key again. The second half of the cadenza is largely comprised of material derived from the opening phrases of the second movement, note the 1-7-1-5 motion, and the ending of the cadenza transitions into the interlude material from the third movement. The interlude is the only melodic material that Gulino deliberately included in both the first and third movements. It was a direct copy-paste from the third to the first in different keys. It's important for the performer to recognize this to ensure consistency and continuity of performance. The trombonist plays a final interjection based on the opening motive and the accompaniment cadences to G flat major 7 to A flat, and the trombonist ends the movement on a pedal B flat. Throughout this piece, it is imperative for the performer to recognize Gulino's use of thematic materials across the different movements of the work, as this familiarity will enable the trombonist to perform in a way that encourages the audience to recognize and recall the various themes as they occur. In this way, the successful performer will facilitate the journey for their audience. At 18 minutes in length, it is comparable or longer than many other standard works in our repertoire, including Ferdinand David's Concertino, Paul Hindemith's Sonata for Trombone, and Launi Grandal's Concerto. This piece provides a work of substantial length for performers who may not yet be ready to attempt more advanced solo literature of similar length. David Perkel mentioned to me that much of Frank Gulino's music addresses a need in the trombone repertoire to which few other composers are attending, that for serious, substantially longer works that are accessible to undergraduate trombonists. Gulino's Sonata Number One is a significant and necessary addition to the repertoire. While it may present mild endurance-related challenges, the technical and musical demands on the performer are modest, and it could be comfortably and appropriately programmed on an undergraduate recital. We'll now move to Joseph Buono's Elegy for Trombone. Dr. Corey Mixdorf of the University of Arkansas contacted Joseph Buono about a commission project in September of 2016. A frequent member of the Southeast Trombone Symposium Professors Choir, Mixdorf was highly impressed by Buono's trombone choir writing in Eclipse, runner-up in the 2014 Southeast Trombone Symposium Composition Competition. Buono was interested, though he had never written a piece for solo trombone and piano. Mixdorf contacted his STS colleagues, and the project was funded in under 48 hours. The consortium contained several high-profile trombonists and established college professors, further motivating Buono to write an exceptional piece of music. Elegy for Trombone and Piano was the result. Initial communication between Mixdorf and Buono defined the parameters of the piece as needing to show off the singing quality of the trombone and to emulate a similar style to that utilized in Eclipse. Buono's writing in Eclipse was minimalist in nature, but highly melodic and somewhat melancholy at times. Mixdorf suggested that the piece be an elegy to fit his upcoming album and asked that both bass and tenor trombone parts be included to generate more interest in the consortium. He recommended several art songs for Buono to emulate stylistically, and also referenced the complexity and interplay of the trombone and piano parts in Stepan Schulich's Sonata Vox Gabrieli. Buono speaks of putting himself in a particular emotional state and improvising gestures on the trombone to come up with melodic ideas. He describes this as a dark point in his life and is somewhat guarded when talking about his emotional state while writing Elegy. He speaks of musically encapsulating the depression that he had gone through the previous year. There was a cathartic element in expressing that pain artistically on the trombone. After a month of this process, he sent his musical ideas to Mixdorf and, upon approval, wrote the piece quickly. He finished Elegy in December of 2016, and Mixdorf was elated at the quality of the piece. When discussing the premiere, Buono again described it as cathartic. The emotions and experiences that he had mined while writing it were still fresh in his mind.
It was the first time I ever heard someone play something that I wrote live, and it was kind of surreal. All these things just existed pretty much in my mind, and I had written them down on paper as approximations. So I'm like, it's something like this, and then to actually hear it, created right in front of me, and also interpreted in slightly different ways than I'd imagined, but very human, insightful ways. It was really emotional. Like, I didn't really want to say much after it because it was a lot to process. It's not like I wasn't thrilled that it was happening, but it also felt like I needed time on my own to process it, because it felt, I don't know, it's almost like if someone got on stage and then read your diary in some sense, because it felt very intimate. It felt so profound in a way, because I knew the suffering in my own life that I had mined and, had put into sound. And then to hear that, then played in front of me, it was like, oh man, like it was cathartic, but it was also, I don't know. In some ways I felt really naked after it, because like I'd really exposed some, like I knew where certain parts of the piece came from emotionally, and like the pain. So to hear it, it was a trip. I wasn't expecting it. I thought I would just be like really ecstatic to hear it played, but it was yeah, I know I'm stumbling, but it's hard. It's kind of ineffable. It's hard to put words around it.
It's evident that the journey of Elegy from composition to premiere was deeply emotional for Buono. Elegy for trombone is programmatic in nature. The through-composed form is of little assistance to the performer in the way of overall structural organization, so it's imperative that the performer be highly familiar with the thematic material used throughout the piece. A study of Buono's notes on Elegy will clarify his use of this thematic material. His notes consist of 2 pages of melodic and rhythmic ideas, as well as a small hand-drawn graph. The melodic and rhythmic ideas are clearly labeled, though not all of the ideas in his notes were ultimately utilized. To better organize his compositional structure, Buono drew a line graph illustrating the emotional intensity of the piece. His notes also include a handwritten representation of the graph. Throughout his notes, Buono references notable romantic and post-romantic composers, namely Rachmaninoff, Shostakovich, and Brahms, as his inspirations for the emotionally intense moments in Elegy. When listed with Dr. Mixdorf's suggestions of Dvorak, Tchaikovsky, and Schulich, the extravagant, sweeping emotional gestures of the late Romantic period and beyond come to mind, and provide the performer with a stylistic baseline to emulate. The graphic shown is from the Rachmaninoff Elegy, and I have labeled several characteristics, including an impassioned, high-register climax, several sighing motives, and a cadenza-esque free ad-lib. Buono uses these same techniques, and his elegy should be approached similarly. This graphic shows sections of the Schulich Sonata Vox Gabrieli, with more sighing motives and Schulich's use of extended syncopation and hemiola. Buono's similar use of these characteristics are shown here. The technical challenges in Elegy are relatively modest. While the majority of the rhythmic content in the trombone part is not complex or confusing, there are multiple cross-bar line phrases and extended hemiolas. The range requirements are not extreme, and Buono's choice of octave displacements, 4 sections in all, are comfortably idiomatic to both bass and tenor trombone. While not overly technically challenging, however, Elegy demands that the performer possess the maturity to connect with the audience on a deeply emotional level. In his preparation for the premiere, Dr. Mixdorf labeled certain sections of emotional character based on the 5 stages of grief. The American Psychological Association Dictionary states the following about the stages of grief. These begin with the denial stage, followed by the anger stage, bargaining stage, depression stage, and acceptance stage. The model is nonlinear in that the stages do not necessarily occur in the given sequence or for a set period of time. Moreover, they can recur and overlap before some degree of psychological and emotional resolution occurs. When presented with Mixdorf's emotional interpretation, Buono agreed with all but 2 of Mixdorf's choices. Mixdorf's emotional character choices are overlaid on Buono's original graph in the illustration, and Buono's rehearsal letters have been included for reference. I will address these as we progress through the piece. When considering the emotions presented, it is necessary to consider the context of this piece. Mixdorf specifically requested that it be an elegy. For our purposes, an elegy is defined as a musical setting lamenting the loss of someone deceased. The performer should integrate Mixdorf's emotional interpretation with a thorough knowledge of Buono's thematic usage, as this will create a foundation from which to explore one's own musical interpretations. The melody begins in the first full measure on a B3, playing material that Buono labeled as opening or prologue. Buono and Mixdorf agree that the opening measures travel from depression to bargaining, and those programmatic elements can be heard in both the trombone and piano parts. The constant, repetitive rhythm in the piano part trudges along as life does after the death of a loved one. The lack of melodic motion in the opening measures of the trombone part implies the sense of hopelessness and emotional numbness that often accompany depression, and the descending sequence of ascending leaps symbolizes a certain pleading of desperation. The intensity of the piece begins to build with Buono's A theme, one measure before rehearsal A, marked doloroso or painful. Buono draws on this material extensively throughout the piece. Rehearsal B represents Buono's first octave displacement between the differentiated parts. The tenor part leaps to an A4, exploring the brilliance of the tenor's high register, while the bass begins an octave down on an F-sharp 2, allowing the player to exhibit the darkness and warmth of sound in the bass trombone's middle register. The tenor and bass parts converge at rehearsal C, a variation on Buono's A theme. The trombone part becomes more rhythmically and melodically intense, with disjunct, angular leaps, and multiple suspensions replacing the conjunct stepwise melodies found earlier. The bel canto marking implies a bit more freedom of expression, allowing the performer to fluctuate tempo to better express the anger that Buono and Mixdorf have agreed on as the emotional state for this section. Rehearsal E marks the appearance of the major variant of Buono's C theme. Mixdorf and Buono labeled this section as another occurrence of reminiscence with the deceased. The key modulates briefly to D major, and the faster tempo in 3/4 is almost dance-like. The pianist plays a short interlude at rehearsal F, providing the trombonist with the only extended period of rest in the piece. The melodic material at F does not appear anywhere in Buono's notes, but it returns in the trombone part at the end of the piece. Rehearsal G represents a distinct change in character that Buono and Mixdorf agree again represents bargaining. The disjunct, angular melodic contour returns, as do the large ascending leaps that were present in the composer's first depiction of bargaining. Buono marks this section tempestuous, and the tempo and rhythmic complexity increase considerably throughout the section. This section also presents the biggest technical challenge of the piece in synchronizing the trombone and piano parts. The rhythmic velocity in the piano part is replaced by a tremolo at rehearsal H, and the trombonist plays two subdued agitato interjections that leap upward and then descend down chromatically, implying further anger and subsequent despair. Rehearsal I further fragments and distorts Buono's A theme before slowing considerably at measure 111. The melody in this section is almost entirely chromatic as it descends, and the emotional intent is overt. Buono marked the section as anguishing. The accelerated melodic heaving motives that follow are derived from the second half of Buono's A theme, and the tempo fluctuates heavily into rehearsal J. The similarity to Schulich here is evident, with Buono directly quoting rehearsal M of the Sonata Vox Gabrieli. Stepan Schulich's Sonata Vox Gabrieli, Latin for voice of Gabriel, is believed to refer to the archangel Gabriel, who serves as a messenger from God in Abrahamic religions. In particular, the piece reflects the notion from the Christian Bible that Gabriel is sent to blow a trumpet blast, a trombone in the Lutheran translation, upon the return of Jesus Christ to earth, signaling the apocalypse. The significance of Buono's use of this quote at this moment should not be understated. When considering the connotation behind the Sonata Vox Gabrieli, the gloom and despair associated with the end of the world adds a layer of emotional depth to the significant anguish already present leading into the emotional climax of Elegy. Rehearsal J is much slower, and the ultimate dramatic climax of the piece falls on a C-sharp 5 at Rehearsal K. Buono's professed anguish is palpable in this thematic transformation of his C theme, marked agonizing, that descends from the brilliance of the tenor's high register into an accented recurrence of the opening prologue motive at the loudest dynamic of the piece. The bass trombone mirrors this an octave down. The minor key and drastic fluctuations in tempo and dynamic all contribute to a feeling of significant emotional anxiety and the unsettledness associated with anguish, defined as severe mental or physical pain and suffering. The key changes to E minor, and the texture dissolves at Rehearsal L. Buono specified this section as resignation as opposed to Mixdorf's label of acceptance. The piano again plays a tremolo, while the trombonist plays a series of painful sighing motives, and the melodic material from the piano interlude at Rehearsal F returns in the trombone part. Rehearsal M is marked grave, and the initial accompaniment rhythm returns in the piano part, marked funereal. The trombonist, desolate, senza vibrato, plays Buono's sober ending with smorzando repeated figures and octave E's marked knelling at the end of the piece. Most of the challenges in Elegy do not lie in its technical demand. Though endurance issues are worth noting, it should be programmed carefully, as the majority of the piece lies in the middle register of the instrument, and there's very little time for the trombonist to rest. A strong undergraduate student should have little trouble with the technical execution of the piece. However, the piece is programmatic in nature, lamenting the loss of a loved one, and demands a high level of musical maturity. A compelling performance of Elegy demands that the performer possess the depth of emotional intelligence to express, on the instrument, the variety of highly complex emotions associated with grief. Buono's performance instructions are incredibly specific in this regard. In 155 measures, Elegy incorporates 25 different tempo instructions, including 12 distinct tempo markings. There are also 24 distinct expressive terms in English, Italian, and German. When asked for recommendations in preparing the piece for performance, Corey Mixdorf's response was one word: emote, echoing my assessment for the need to have a high level of musical maturity. When referenced back to the composers to emulate, this depth of maturity is absolutely vital to a compelling performance of the piece. Elegy for trombone and piano provides a deeply emotional addition to the repertoire, an area of the literature that is often overlooked and underserved. The differentiated parts assure that the piece is both accessible and idiomatic to tenor and bass trombonists alike, and it would be a comfortable and appropriate programming choice as a musical emotional challenge for a strong undergraduate, graduate, or professional trombonist. In closing, the two 21st century works presented tonight, Sonata Number One, The Journey, and Elegy for Trombone, written by trombonist-composers Frank Gulino and Joseph Buono, represent a necessary and substantial addition to the repertoire. Each addresses a certain need to which very few other composers are attending. Gulino's sonata bridges the gap between accessibility and substantiality, resulting in a multi-movement composition that could be the cornerstone of an undergraduate recital. And Buono's Elegy allows for intense musical expression that goes above and beyond much of what is available in current solo trombone literature. It is for the reasons outlined tonight that these pieces warrant serious study and performance by both students and professionals. Now, give us just a moment to transition to the performance portion of this recital, and I hope you enjoy Frank Gulino's Sonata Number One, The Journey, and Joe Buono's Elegy for Trombone and Piano. Give us just a second to transition.